So stop me if you at any point in time, if you're not hearing me or not seeing my slides. Just a word of background. You're probably wondering why an American is speaking at the MDI conference, and I'll give you some background. I trained in the US. I also trained in London. And after my research degree thesis defense, I gave a lecture at the Children's Hospital Temple Street, was invited by my colleagues to consider working with them. And I said that would be, I thought, a wonderful opportunity, which it was. I worked at Temple Street Hospital and just checking, there's no messages, perfect. Temple Street Hospital and the CRC in Clontarf from 2013 to 2014, which I immensely enjoyed. I've been at the National Institutes of Health in the US in Bethesda since 2015. It's a clinical research center where all the patients we see are enrolled in clinical studies, be it natural history or clinical trials. But I maintain a close link with my colleagues in Ireland, and last year I was fortunate to have a Fulbright Scholar Award, and it was at the University College Cork for biomarker research. So I asked my colleagues at MDI, I'd spoken actually at the CMD community gathering last August, which was wonderful because a patient of mine from Dublin, who's now at Trinity College, spoke, and he's part of one of our clinical sites at the NIH. And I spoke with Maeve and Dimthna about what would be helpful for you. And so this topic is born out of that discussion. It resonates with what I hear in the States and from the patients in 38 countries around the globe that I've been in contact with about the importance for connecting for care and making sure we're giving, the optimized clinical care at all points. And the photo at the top of my slide is from one of our patient organization meetings for congenital muscle disease. So my area of research and focus is congenital muscle disease. I think that photo kind of optimally covers kind of how we should care for each other and how really caring for each other is really the way forward. And so I tried to kind of outline is a schematic of how there is this interconnectedness, and I can definitely attest to what Professor Hardiman said, is in Ireland you have immense interconnectedness, you have immensely well-trained physicians, and the community itself is an invaluable resource. But we all rely on each other. So when you come to clinic, you're going to be talking to your physicians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists about how you're doing, what your symptoms are. But very importantly, when we hear from you, then we can also kind of tune in the radio dial to where you are according to your condition. We can also provide condition-specific guidance or clinical care guidelines for your condition, which I'll speak about more. And importantly, for researchers who are developing therapies for medications for clinical trials and new therapies, interventions, they want to bring you those therapies, but they also need to hear from the community what's important, what you need, what are important outcomes that would be improving your quality of life, improving your function. And really we rely on the patient organizations, such as MDI, to connect us all, to bring us together, such as in this forum. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person with all of you today, but it is precisely this forum that brings us all together. So MDI will be interacting with the patients, the families, and caregivers, but also it's so important for MDI to hear from you what you need and to bring the information to the physician, physiotherapist, occupational therapist. So we all are dialoguing about patient needs, and we all work together to push progress forward. And importantly, MDI can be, and other organizations can be, a spokesperson to interact with regulatory agencies such as the European Medicines Agency and government agencies as well. So they can be a spokesperson. But I think very importantly, the most invaluable resource which you all have and you will realize is each other. And that's really important to recognize. And I'm going to give an example of my own experience. So in the congenital muscle disease field, we had an annual meeting for children with college and 6-related congenital muscular dystrophy. And it was the parents at one of these wonderful weekends who came to us and said, we should extend this meeting. We should basically invite further families and families who may not be part of a community as wonderful as our community, and welcome others. And so really with the generosity of the parents to say, let's invite other families with children with other forms of muscular dystrophy under the kind of the umbrella of congenital muscle diseases, so we can share this community and share the knowledge. And that grew in the next 10 years to become this very large group of gathering of over 200 families. We call it Cure CMD, or Cure Congenital Muscular Dystrophy, where we have a scientific and family conference for 4 days of coming together where the scientists and physicians can dialogue directly with the families and share their research and share updates. And so this has become the favorite conference for all of my colleagues in the field, because it does give you that beautiful interaction, the motivation, and knowing what we need to bring to the community. So really a model of interconnectivity, which has really expanded through the years. And these are some candid photos taken from these patient and family conferences, which really, I think, capture the moments, these beautiful candid moments of connectivity, of being able for the children to feel that they're part of a community where they're not the only one in the room in a wheelchair, where they have colleagues and friends they grow up with, and also for the parents to bond, because really the resource is invaluable for my teenagers who don't want to use the non-invasive ventilation we just heard about. I may speak to them, ad nauseum about how important it is, but it really is when I link them together and they talk to each other, they'll say, yeah, it's cool because so-and-so is using it and I know it's important. So I think it's an invaluable resource for, destigmatizing the use of non-invasive ventilation and allowing our children and young adults and adults to be exposed to different forms of support, be it mobility support or respiratory support, and just really the joy of having each other and feeling not alone. So we focused a lot of our efforts with the community to really optimize care, and I'm going to link that to how it's important, not only most importantly for quality of life, but also for preparing for medications in clinical trials and research being translated. And so when we focus on optimizing care, we try to provide the community in real time, ideally updated guidelines. And this has been our struggle because we may publish a paper on guidelines, but rapidly it becomes outdated. And we receive new information from the community about things that you're experiencing, and we're doing natural history studies in real time. We're getting more and more data. And so we recognize that even though we're publishing written guidelines that you can have available on your phone and share with physicians in emergency room, and have that wherever you are traveling the world, what we also need is to be able to update that in real time. So we've updated some of the different guides. I've updated recently the gene review, but we had a workshop this January. We recognized we need to provide the community with really a kind of an app that could be a resource for expert care recommendations, because a lot of our recommendations are not at the level of evidence-based guidelines, but yet are still important recommendations from international collaboration of experts, which are ones we want you to have available in real time. So again, this is an expanding area, but I think knowing that you can access expert information, both online from different guides, those that are published, but also via patient organizations. There's also many resources where you can access information coming from experts about what is in real time. The level of care that we're seeing is optimizing quality of life for our patients. But also optimized clinical care is one of the three pillars that I see for clinical trial readiness, meaning when a clinical trial is active and ready to enroll, we want to ensure we have optimized clinical care. And the reason for that is so that every trial participant starts from the same level of optimized proactive care. We've run many clinical trials in our team for children with muscle diseases, and we've been surprised at the time of enrollment that many patients are not receiving optimized care, even from very reputable medical centers. And so we're trying to communicate to both to families and to our colleagues internationally that non-invasive ventilation should be started proactively and not at the time of a severe respiratory infection. And so getting ahead of the curve, being proactive, making sure we get optimized clinical care is really important for quality of life, but also for clinical trial readiness. And for example, just touch on also a topic for us, which is really probably the most important in our field, and we just heard about a beautiful lecture about the importance of respiratory care. We make sure that we tell families that pulmonary function testing, both upright and supine, should be performed by their local pulmonary team, polysomnogram or sleep studies with careful measurements of carbon dioxide. You'd be surprised sometimes we have patients get a whole sleep study, and no carbon dioxide measurement. We're actually pivoting much more now to even checking carbon dioxide measurements, capnography in the clinic. So making families aware of those metrics, which are really important to detect hypoventilation or early signs of respiratory insufficiency. We're pushing for timely initiation of non-invasive ventilation. We had to start non-invasive ventilation in many patients during clinical trials, and that's not the ideal time. And so we're trying to be timely in that, but also the use of the cough assist machine, which we just heard about, came on the scene during the time of my training, I think has been a real miracle worker to prevent recurrent chest infections, really taking that phlegm and getting it out before it progresses to a lower respiratory infection or pneumonia. So this has been a kind of my mantra with all my patients about making sure we're all getting proactive respiratory care and proactive care overall, optimizing clinical care. We also are working with the community to identify outcome measures. So when we do clinical trials, we're measuring something important to the patients. Also something measurable. So we want to have age-appropriate outcome measures based on the age of the individual affected with muscle disease, a disease stage-appropriate outcome measure, one that's reliable and reproducible. We can measure time and time again in clinical assessments and clinical visits, something again meaningful to the individual living with muscle disease and also sensitive to changes over time. And so, for example, we have different tools. We have motor function testing, we have cardiac assessment, pulmonary assessments, and quality of life assessments. These are our metrics so that when we go to the EMA or the FDA and say, we have a new medication, it's made a difference, we need to show that we've made a difference. But and we've done this so far in our congenital muscle disease community, and looking at two subtypes, the most common, the collagen 6 and lamma 2. We had a 4-year study where we were able to see the annual rate of change in strength, in motor function, and also pulmonary function. And very importantly, this told us the number of patients we need to enroll in a clinical trial to detect that the intervention, the medication, is stabilizing the condition. But most importantly, I think for the EMA and the FDA now is to say our change that the medication has affected is clinically important to the patient. So we're focusing on what's called minimal clinically important difference, or MCID, so that we say to these regulatory agencies, this change is important to the patient and has changed their quality of life, improved their quality of life. And we've done this work with our motor function scales in our patient populations, asking patients, is this motor change significant? And then being able to say, we can anchor our changes measured with clinical importance to the individual. That's why we're doing this, and we need to make sure that we have that. And I've been on a number of FDA panels when it comes down to, is this change really an important change for the family and for the individual living with this condition? And that's really the key question. We have some exploratory outcome measures. As mentioned briefly, we're using some muscle imaging. We do muscle ultrasound, muscle MRI. The MRI is a little tough for children to undergo, but for adults, muscle imaging can be quantitative. We're also using a laser imaging approach called multispectral optoacoustic tomography to measure fibrosis in muscles. And these are all exploratory outcome measures which may be used in future studies for measuring change that are really non-invasive ways of measuring change. We're looking at biomarkers, serum, plasma, urine. Muscle's a little bit more invasive, but ways where we can say we're actually making a change in the disease process. And we're also trying some remote outcome measures, kind of some basically accelerometry and different metrics we can measure when individuals are at home to measure overall activity. Other ways of measuring outcomes. Just to touch briefly on biomarkers, we want to look at things that are disease relevant and potentially disease stage relevant, capable of reflecting potential therapeutic changes, ideally to provide really a measure of disease and target engagement. And examples can be serum and urine, muscle tissue. In many of the FDA panels, the discussion comes down to, do we have a marker beyond the motor function outcomes, which can be variable individuals? Do we have a marker of a change of the disease process, be it serum, be it urine? And this has been important, as we know, in different clinical trials for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for spinal muscular atrophy, for ALS, having markers beyond just the motor and respiratory function to provide further robust data that we're changing the course of the condition. So I was lucky last year to spend 9 months at the University College Cork and had the wonderful colleagues there at the Infant Center to do some biomarker discovery research. I have many samples from young patients. I had a pilot study. I brought over some samples of serum, and then the benefit of working with our colleagues at University College Cork is they have age-matched control samples. So this data analysis is ongoing, but we have some beautiful microRNA and proteomics data, which we envision will be really important for the clinical trials we have planned to start in the next few years. And then the final part of the clinical trial readiness pillars I view as like that of studying natural history. So we've all done a lot of work. You heard about the ALS work and also with amyloidosis, all the beautiful natural history data that you need to have before you start a clinical trial. So you say to the EMA and the FDA, we know the natural history of this condition and we're changing that natural history. So historically, we've looked really at studying the entire range of severity. We're also focusing a lot on this deep phenotyping, basically deep studying, deep analysis of clinical symptoms in all body systems, all organs that may be involved. We've been involved in a gene therapy trial recently where there was under recognition of the involvement of the liver in that condition. So we learn from these really important studies that and also adverse events that can happen to understand that we need to make sure we understand the condition, all systems that may be involved. all organ systems. We need to enable clinical trials to be powered with lower numbers of patients to prove effectiveness and efficacy. And also, we want to study the natural history to ensure that we're changing the disease course and that change can be clearly recognized. So we've done some historical retrospective natural history. This is work I had done in college in 6-way dystrophies to really define, the decline in pulmonary function, because that is the most important, morbidity issue for our patients in this condition. And off this data, we've used this data, I'll mention a clinical trial that we had to know that we were really affecting, a change in the pulmonary function, in the natural history of the decline of pulmonary function, which we measure typically with forced vital capacity. We've also done a lot of data analysis retrospectively for another form of congenital muscular dystrophy, laminin AC. We then also for myristoyl deficiency. All of this data has been really mainly retrospective, but currently we're doing multiple prospective natural history studies across the US and with collaborators around the globe. So we have much more robust data prospectively, all age ranges, including for very young children. So the data between ages, from birth to 5 years is the data we're concentrating on now in robust prospective natural history studies. But this overall clinical trial readiness relies on collaboration between affected individuals living with muscle diseases and their families, with clinicians, with researchers, with patient organizations, with academic and federal organizations, with pharmaceutical companies. And as these therapies are in preclinical development, our clinical trial readiness continue to occur in parallel, including the optimizing of clinical care, looking for those outcome measures and performing those natural history studies. Just to give an example of a completed clinical trial, so a clinical study we had performed for children ages 5 through 16 years with LAMA2 or myristoyl deficient congenital muscular dystrophy and collagen 6-related congenital muscular dystrophy. We did a phase 1 open label sequential group study of safety and pharmacokinetics, which we completed in 20 patients. And just to summarize, and this is basically to give you a kind of overview, but we were able to prove from the study that we could recruit and run a clinical trial in these rare diseases. We had a statistician from Columbia, Dr. Ken Chung, who helped us design this statistical model so we could hit our ideal pharmacokinetic profile with a low probability of overshooting that profile for the level of the drug, and we had a ability to interpolate the dosing so we could get to the correct dosing to land us within the ideal range of the drug in the blood. So at the end of the study, we were able to prove that the drug was safe and well tolerated, and we were able to identify that the dosage of 0.06 milligrams per kilogram per day was a dose that was going to be effective in reaching that ideal dosing range. So again, this study gave us opportunity to prove really to regulatory agencies we can perform a clinical trial in these rare diseases. It's feasible. The families were inordinately devoted. We had wonderful recruitment and wonderful maintained performance throughout the whole clinical trial. And then we also were able to assess the safety and tolerability of this drug, Omega pill, which is an oral compound, anti-cell death compound, anti-apoptotic compound. We were able to understand the pharmacokinetics of this drug, Omega pill, and its potential over time for accumulation in the blood, which was minimal. And we were able to assess various outcome measures, including some exploratory outcome measures. We use grayscale muscle ultrasound, we use muscle MRI, and we collected biomarkers. So all this data is going to be important for future clinical trials in these patient populations. And we learned some lessons, and probably the most important one being that optimized clinical care or standard of care needs to be achieved prior to enrollment. You'd be surprised. We have children in large medical centers, even in New York City, where maybe the clinician caring for them is unaware of the natural history of their condition. So we need to do better to communicate to our colleagues and internationally to have that data available to families on their phone, what the clinical guidelines are or the known expert care recommendations are in real time, so we get standard of care achieved prior to enrolling in a clinical trial. We also learned about timing of assessments during a study to minimize fatigue for participants and also the burden of travel. Like the centralization of the care in Dublin. For the US, these are kids coming from all over the country to one site, and so that's a difficult travel burden, and so having multiple sites is actually going to be ideal if possible for other future clinical trials. And then this is a really collaborative effort between our section at the NIH, collaborators at Columbia and UPenn and in London. And then very importantly to mention, this clinical trial would not have been possible at the fundraising of the patient organization that literally raised $200,000 that enabled the biopharma company, which was lacking funds, to be able to run this study. We ran the clinical trial free of charge to the company with federal funding, but the pharmacokinetics and the running of the study was really in great part funded by a patient and family organization with some grants from the FDA and a consortium called EndoStem. So finally, to summarize, I think of it as a kind of like growing a plant or growing a garden. Together we thrive. So if we work alone on growing a plant, it's very wonderful and rewarding, but it actually much more rewarding and much more successful, I think, when we work together. And so analogously, we can have our own garden on our balcony or in our backyard, but I think working together, we really do thrive, because you'll find someone in the community has knowledge about a certain question that you had that maybe even your physician doesn't know the answer to. So having each other as an invaluable resource, having the interplay with the physicians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, the patient organizations, all that's important. And this photo is from a community garden in Ireland. And fun fact, I found that there's actually a community gardens Ireland organization, which is very inclusive and accessible. So again, I think we thrive together, and we're all looking forward to, I think, a promising future of a lot of potential translation of the therapies that are in development, and we remain focused on that and hoping to bring these therapies to patients with muscle diseases around the world. Thank you very much.